All right. So after a bit of a hiatus, Through the Keyhole is back. It is whatever month it is. I think it's March, and we're happy to be back. I have a guest today, this afternoon. We met on Twitter, and we've had some fun interactions. You might know her as Going Godward. I know her as GG. And so I'm going to call her that on the episode. GG, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm glad we were able to do this. We had some technical issues to get started, but
Yes,
that seems
I
to
live
be.
with technical issues. I always have a technical issue.
I do too. I do too. Like I was telling you before the show, I talk to a dozen clients on Zoom every week and not an issue. And then, when I have a podcast guest, it's just like, what can go wrong? It's going to go wrong.
It's totally fine.
So, the way I like to do these shows is I like to just talk to my guests for a while, get to know them, who they are, what their thing is about. And the best way to do that is probably just to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself. So who are you? What's your thing?
So I am a social worker professionally. That's what my professional role is. I work in a school setting. I work as a school counselor, social work support in a Title I school in the city I live.
Mhm.
So I've been involved in all sorts of education, private tutoring, in the public school. I have done like substitute teaching kind of thing before I got more into the social work role.
Yeah.
But now I've been doing social work for either federally funded pre-K programs or in the public school setting. So that's kind of professionally what I do. Personally, I just read a lot. And I have two teenage boys, and I'm about to get some cats.
Nice.
And my interests are like, theology, philosophy,
Yeah.
psychology, that kind of stuff.
What so I don't know if it's like this for social workers, but I'm a therapist, I'm a counselor, whatever you want to call me. And there seems to be something of a kind of a professional rivalry. At least in Texas, there's a bit of a professional rivalry between social workers and therapists. Because it seems like social workers get a lot of jobs that therapists want, but therapists can't get a lot of jobs that social workers want. It's just kind of a weird thing. So why social work? What draws you to that? How did you land on that?
So for me, and I know this sounds probably like, I don't know, I don't want to like spiritualize the response, but I mean, for me, when I got into social work, all I could think about was I had this theme of redemption in my mind. And I felt like social work offered an opportunity to be part of a redemptive process in people's lives.
Yeah.
Because social work really encompasses, the therapeutic side, the counseling side, but also like a resource connection side. And it's kind of this, you're developing a whole plan for someone's life. You're not just focusing on the counseling and the therapeutic side of healing, psychological, emotional, spiritual healing. You're also connecting them physically to things that will improve their life. So while I might be walking a family through, both parents maybe have job loss, or one parent, if it's a single parent home, has job loss and they need income and they need housing or they need transportation, and just the emotional toil that takes on them. I'm working through that piece, but I'm also connecting them with housing and transportation, and we're working with career services to get plugged into a job. So it's just kind of this whole approach to redemption, to taking what's broken and fixing it.
That's really interesting to hear you say that, because in my current job, I work in a community mental health setting. And even though I'm a counselor, like by trade, that's what my education's in, my licensure is counseling. I'm technically a caseworker, like that's what I was hired to do. And so the resource finding and connection and all that. And I don't know what your experience has been in that line of work, but my experience has been eye-opening. Like you talk about the redemptive side of things and that kind of being your driver.
Mhm.
I get that because, you know, like I'm a middle class white guy. I've come from just kind of that life that you would probably expect.
Mhm.
Most of my clients are low income, African
Right.
American, functionally homeless, if not completely homeless.
Right.
All of them have trauma in their backgrounds, and it's just
Mhm.
it's opened my eyes, and I'm wondering what impact your work has had maybe on you on a personal level, a spiritual level, a political level, because you know
Mhm.
I've certainly been impacted in all those ways.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, Spiritually, I think it's just, and I'm sure you experience the same thing, it's just kind of a reinforcement that we do live in a broken world.
Yeah.
We live in a broken world. And having that worldview, I think, has really helped me to not be so bogged down and weighted down by the problems that I see
Hmm.
every day.
Hmm.
Um, just knowing that we live in a broken world, and as a Christian, knowing that Christ is redeeming this world, He will redeem this world, and just having that hope um, is really, I guess, spiritually how I'm affected.
Yeah.
Just a reminder of the brokenness and a reminder of the redemption. And what else did you say? Mentally, but I don't know what.
Yeah, mentally, personally,
Oh,
politically.
yeah. I think. Well, I will say, being in the field is in the amount of time I've been in it, and in the capacity that I've worked, and where I've worked, it's really helped me to refine where my strengths are, where I want to focus my attention, and just kind of where I want to go professionally, for the next 20-25 years.
Yeah.
Because I'm 40, so I want to, I want to work for at least,
You volunteered that. I want it known. I did not ask you volunteered that.
listen, I'm 40 and proud. I'm like, I mean, I think one thing I've said this before, I'm gonna chase a rabbit, you go down a rabbit trail.
Mhm.
I think women who, in my experience, kind of go through this crisis, maybe I'll go through it, I don't know, but it has a lot to do with like feeling okay about what you've done so far and kind of
Mhm.
a plan for where you're going. So I feel excited about being 40 and about the next 25-ish years of getting to work professionally. And
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, my point is
Hmm.
it's really helped me being in the field. I've gotten to refine my interests, I kind of know what my strengths are now. I've built a network of people, and I can kind of move forward with my vision professionally. So I don't know if that answers your question well
No,
or not.
it answers and it opens up a new question, which is what is your vision professionally? You mentioned being excited about the next 20 or 25 years of working. What do you see for yourself in that period of time, to the extent that you can forecast a decade or 2 decades or 2.5 decades?
Right. It's looking kind of grim right now. So
It is.
tentatively, these are my plans. If
Okay.
if,
Tentatively.
if the Lord don't come and the creek don't rise, that these
Yeah.
are my plans. So from knowing me on Twitter, I'm a huge education advocate,
Mhm.
and I just see a massive need for choice for low income populations,
Hmm.
especially in my city. I mean, I'm speaking from my city and also where I come from in Southern Appalachia. Um, I don't live in Southern Appalachia anymore, but though I miss it. I I see so many students who do not have their parents, they don't really know what their options are. They don't know that they have a choice. They don't have to be, they just don't know what their education options are.
Right.
And then if they do discover what they are, they can't afford them. So just looking at opportunities to provide a really high education choice for low income families. That is my number one goal. So if that involves, you know, becoming an advocate for redistricting, like redistricting the lines so that families have more opportunities to go to schools that are higher performing,
Mhm.
to promote school choice, to give more private and charter school options. Um, all those things. And then I'm also, so that for all of low income families. And then working on a transitional refugee school program. I live in a city that has the highest number of refugees per capita than
Wow.
any other city in the country. And the school system, we have roughly 6% of our students are all refugee. They were all born in a different country and they speak a different language. I think we have 30 different languages represented in our school system.
Jeez.
30, it's a lot.
Gracious.
So we are in desperate need of something that serves that population of students. So I'm presently working on a 2-year transition school / program. I'm not sure how it's going to be funded or what it's going to be like labeled as.
Yeah.
Where students will come there for up to 2 years to do English language learning, and also like an assimilation piece.
Mhm.
There was a recent article written by, oh gosh, I can't think of the name of the girl who did it. She writes for USA Today, but anyway, she did an article on my city,
Mhm.
and the students came out and said the hardest piece for us was like going and sitting in a classroom and not knowing English. So like trying to learn English alongside, doing chemistry work. It was
Right.
impossible. Like it was so they couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And their dropout rates were high. So there's just a huge need for something like that in my city. And that's something I've been working on for a couple of years.
Yeah. Interesting.
Mhm.
What when you were in grade school, college, whatever time frame you want to choose, what kind of student were you? Were you like passionate about the level of education you were receiving? Were you just like, I'm gonna read the cliff notes and get by on whatever grade I can? Like,
Mhm.
what were you like?
Yeah. So in grade school, like elementary, middle school, I was like the straight A student, wanted to perform. And even in high school, I was a good student,
Mm,
mostly A's, a few B's, that kind of thing. But I was involved in so many things in high school. I just didn't, I don't say school wasn't a priority, but I did what I needed to do to make, good grades, like good
yeah.
enough grades, A's, and maybe I made B's and, like trigonometry and stuff like
Mm,
that. It was important. I'm firstborn, only girl
mm,
of 3 children. So I'm a little bit of that compliant rule follower, kind of thing when it comes to that. So I was a good student, and most of my school experience was really positive.
mm,
I grew up in a really teeny tiny rural town. Um, I never thought about that I was getting a poor education. I felt like I was getting a pretty decent education. I felt like for the school system that I grew up in the region I grew up in, we had a lot of opportunities to do really exciting things. We had an archaeological dig when I was in middle school.
nice.
We did Civil War reenactments.
Fun.
We got to go to Kennedy Space Center for a field trip,
That's awesome.
and I had some really great experiences. And then my high school class was very small.
Mm,
I've mentioned before our valedictorian played the bagpipes, and he like brought the bagpipes into lunch every day, and we sat there and listened to him play the bagpipes,
that's
or the
awesome.
banjo. He played his banjo at our graduation, So I had a really good experience, but I will say, I mean, that was 20 years ago,
Sure.
and things have changed so much since then. And I don't know that anybody is getting that kind of experience
Yeah.
outside of private education now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm also very passionate about about education. My interests tend to be more in higher education, but
Mhm.
yeah, like when I was in grade school, I was kind of like you. Like I wasn't a bad student. I could have been a much better student. I guess that's where
Right.
you and I
Same
kind
thing.
of differ. Like if I got a B, like I could have done better, but at the same time, it keeps my teachers, my parents, and my coaches off of me, so it's good enough.
Right.
Um, my parents didn't really ever push studying as long as I made the grade. But then I got to college and suddenly that didn't work. And I actually had to apply myself, and it got kind of grim there for a while, but then that was when I learned, like, hey, I'm actually a good student. And when you apply yourself, like, good things happen. Who would have thought?
Right.
And so since then, yeah, education's been very important to me. And you know, you see the kind of direction that education is going, particularly, you know, public education is going. And it's just like, can you really even call this, like, yeah, I guess it's education in the sense that you're learning, but is it education in the sense that you're learning something valuable or
Right.
helpful, or that's
Right.
going to
Right.
expand you as a human? What are your thoughts on what's going on just in general in the educational sphere in the US?
So my boys started to school in 2009, so they've been, in school for the last decade, and I started seeing a decline around 2011. And I mean, to me, that was like when things really started to, I could see like a serious decline. And it seemed to be around that time that teachers were being required to do a lot more monitoring. So, like, where kids are at this level of reading, and they had to document all this stuff. And I remember going into teachers' classrooms, because then I was volunteering at the school. It was this my kids went to this itty bitty rural school in Tennessee.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, teeny tiny school. And I remember going in, and the teacher had like all these shelves of notebooks and portfolios and stuff. And I mean, you had to like monitor where this kid was in performance in this area and where they performed in that area. And you had to keep track of all that. And now I'm in a public school, and the amount of monitoring teachers have to do for students in terms of progress is it's so time consuming. It's such a time consuming task. So they're not able to sit and teach or that kind of thing. So much of their time is spent monitoring. It's like, yeah, and I feel like they don't have the instruction opportunities that they used to, because they're having to monitor. The other thing, and I was actually talking about this on Twitter the other day, behavior has gotten so out of control. I mean, so out of control that teachers either spend time monitoring or addressing behavioral needs.
Right.
And there's just not a lot of time left to instruct and teach. And like you said, whatever's being taught, is it something that's valuable?
Yeah.
And I've talked about this on Twitter a lot, and I'm sure you feel the same way. We want to see education moored in virtue. We want to see that there's a deeper meaning or purpose behind what we're doing. What does it point us to? Where does it lead us? If we learn that 2 + 2 is 4, which I know that's debatable now, apparently.
Evidently.
If you learn 2 + 2 is 4, like, what does that tell us about reality?
Yeah.
So you're wanting it to point you to objective reality. You're wanting education to show you what's really going on in the universe.
Yeah.
Hear my dog whimpering. I'm hoping she's I'm gonna send a little message to my son to make sure she's not. So I mean, I don't know hey, did you go to parochial school? Did you go to public school? What did you go
to? Grade school for me was all public. K through 12 was all public. My undergraduate and my graduate school were both at different Southern Baptist affiliated universities.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I went to
Interesting.
So I went to undergraduate. There's a small school in Belton, Texas, which is about an hour and a half north of Austin. It's called University of Mary Hardin Baylor.
Okay.
It's actually, people don't know this. Like, I tell people I went to University of Mary Hardin Baylor, and they say, "Oh, I have a nephew who goes to Baylor." It's like, no, I didn't. No, not Baylor. Mary Hardin Baylor. We actually gave birth to Baylor. Baylor came from our school. But yeah, so I went there, studied political science, double minored in history and economics. My mentor, I was really fortunate to start taking a few classes taught by an adjunct professor who became my mentor. And the reason he became my mentor was because he was a retired lieutenant colonel who spent his entire career in military intelligence.
Mhm.
And so he had, you know, not to push around my evangelical brothers and sisters, but he just had a very different worldview than what you came to expect at this, small Baptist college.
Mhm.
And he was kind of the one who taught me like what it means to think critically and how to do that and how to really read. And
Mhm.
one of our final exams, the final exam for one of his classes was he gave us what was the name? He gave us all the publicly available intelligence for there was a terrorist, something Zarqawi, I think was his name. He was
Oh, that was during like 2001. Zarqawi, I think I
yeah.
know who you're talking about. Yes.
So he gave us all the publicly available intelligence, and he
Mhm.
told us to basically come up with the conclusion on like where he was, what this guy was guilty of, how to find him,
Oh,
how
interesting.
to
That's very
like bring
interesting.
him to justice.
Yeah.
And that was for a class in political science. And so like that was
Mhm.
always very interesting to me.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
but like it was such a stark contrast because in grade school, and I used to be embarrassed to admit this, but now it's just like, well, it is what it is. In grade school, I never mastered the concept of like nouns, verbs, adjectives, like just it never stuck with me. It wasn't until I got into college and really until I started writing and publishing that I
Mhm.
really started learning the parts of grammar and what
Mhm.
everything
Mhm.
was. And it was, it's because, like you said, like even back then, this would have been 2001 through 5. Even back then, it was we were taught toward the test. We were taught towards the SAT or the ACT or just all that kind of stuff, and we weren't really instructed. We were just kind of given what we were told we needed to know. So yeah, so when I like I said, when I got to college and I realized, hey, I'm actually like not a terrible student, it it completely changed my opinions on the value of education, because up to that point it had just been bad experiences with algebra 2, or
Mhm.
like reading The Great Gatsby and thinking that you're well versed in high literature. And nothing against The Great Gatsby, but it's
No,
like
no, 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 no. I know what you
it's
mean,
like
though.
there's a long distance between that and War
Yeah.
and Peace, which I hear
Right.
is now canceled.
Is it?
um
Oh, I don't know. I can't keep track of everything they're canceling.
Yeah, I think I saw earlier this week that that some college somewhere removed Dostoevsky from their curriculum, and then I saw yesterday that Netflix had a show about Tolstoy that was in production, and they canceled that, and it's just like
As we speak, I literally have this sitting.
yeah, like the brothers Karamazov is on my bookshelf as one of the next books I'm going to read. And it's just like, what are we doing? And these are educational institutions that are canceling you know arguably the greatest writer in the past 500 years. um and so yeah, the thing I seem to ask a lot of my guests is simply just, what is happening? Like, what like, you look around at the world, what do you think is happening?
I think it's just this complete um destroy. I don't know. This is such a hard question because
It
I'm
is.
like I have there's like so many things I think are going wrong. I think if I had to really say one thing, it's that the meta narrative of the West
Mhm.
has been completely dismantled
Hmm.
or is close to being dismantled. And that meta narrative has been Christianity. That's kind of been the overarching um, principled idea,
Yeah.
ideal of the West, and that has been, I think, it's beginning to disintegrate.
Yeah.
So what will that be replaced with? And it seems as though it's being replaced with something that's not rooted in objective reality. It's
Yeah.
something that is, whatever someone's perceived reality is.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what I would say is just the dismantling of the meta narrative that has
Yeah.
been part of the West for the last several few hundred years.
Has been part of the West pretty much since
Since the West
was
was
the West.
born, like
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah. Like
Yeah,
what is
that's
the
what I'm thinking.
like what
Yeah.
is the context of the West without
The church
Christianity?
without Christianity, right?
Yeah. Like I don't like to put it that way because a lot of people hear that sort of thing and you're like, oh, so you just want a theocracy. It's like, no. I'm just talking about the general, like, how do you feel about Rod Dreyer?
I read Live Not by Lies,
Mm-hmm.
and I really liked his foreword of Carl Truman's book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self.
Need to read that. Yeah.
Oh, it's excellent. I also haven't seen it here. I'm okay. Listen, I'm working on a project right now to get my. I am embarrassed to say how many books I have. I have a problem. It's like it's a problem. And so I just have kind of stacks everywhere, and I actually have Truman's book right here. So from those points, I really like his writing. I follow him on Twitter. I read a lot of his stuff.
Yeah.
So I think he's definitely prescient. Is that the word? Maybe.
I think that is an apt way of describing Dreyer. And the reason I ask is because the book you wrote before Live Not Live. Hey, there's my dog.
Was it the Benedict option?
Benedict option. And the whole thing about Saint Benedict is that, as Dreyer puts it, when Rome was collapsing and burning and taking all of what was then world civilization with it, mm-hmm. Benedict and his monk friends, they were the ones who did the yeoman's work of preserving what they could, so that when things leveled out a bit, something could come up from the ashes. And and there doesn't seem like we need more of that. Like I don't
that's
know.
It's a really good thought.
It is. And I think that's why I like Dreyer, because he seems like that seems to be his thing. He's a big Alexander Solzhenitsyn fan. Mm-hmm. And in 76, I think 75 or 76, Solzhenitsyn and some of his fellow dissidents, they wrote a book called From Under the Rubble. Mm-hmm. And it was all about how Russia could emerge once the Soviet Union collapsed. Mm-hmm. And so they provide all of these different ideas. Mm-hmm. And so there's.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go.
Go.
I was just going to say there seems to be this pattern of people who are of sound enough mind to recognize when things are going south and start preparing for a long winter, so that when everything begins to thaw, we're not left saying like, okay, so how do we start a fire? We've already got the matches and the wood set aside. So what were you going to say?
Well, kind of the same thing. I do feel like there are people who are kind of doing that right now, who are saying, what can we preserve? What needs to be preserved spiritually, intellectually, so that when it does kind of collapse, I hate using that word, and I'm not a doomer. I'm like and I'm not like an eternal I am an eternal optimist in that I do believe creation will be fully redeemed.
Sure.
But in this present moment, I'm just kind of preparing for, I don't know.
Who knows?
I'm not sure. I tweeted about that this morning. I feel like there are kind of two Americas right now. There's one, mm-hmm. and both of them are anticipating collapse. One because they think that they deserve it because we're a racist country and we're terrible. And the other because we are so horrible, we deserve collapse.
Right.
But not because we're racist, but because we've abandoned Christian principles. We've, abandoned virtue,
Yeah.
essentially. And everybody's anticipating collapse. I don't know where I was going to go with it, but well, just that I do kind of see that people are trying to preserve something.
Yeah.
I'm sure you see it on Twitter. Like I can kind of I could probably name like 5 people right now. I'm like, okay, I want to connect with them when everything falls. Like, I want to be connected to those people. Yeah.
No, like that was a big reason why I wanted to get the podcast started. Was I see it as my own little tiny contribution to preserving or to conserving. I'm a conservative, not in the sense that people typically hear that phrase and think of it, but in a more like traditional Burkean, Russell Kirk sort of thing. And the whole idea there is that conservatives start with the idea that there is something worth conserving.
Right.
And so, that's kind of my driver. And because there are things worth conserving, right? Like Sam Gamgee says, there is some good in this world and it's worth fighting for.
Yes. Right.
But it can be very easy to forget that when you look around and it's just, there's a war over here and inflation and you can't afford to drive anywhere and pandemic is still going and there's a new variant and just all these different things.
Right.
And it's like, so good gracious, like, can we get a friggin' break just for a minute?
It's pretty grim right this minute. I'm not gonna lie. I'm like, oh gosh. And if I remember whenever when COVID first started back in 2020, I mean, I just was so depressed. I was like, man, we are never going to get out of this. Like, never. And I feel like I'm just now coming out of the fog of that depression that it brought upon me. Just because I think anybody who had any sense of reality could see where this is going to take us. Like, we're never going to be the same after this, because so much, overreach and the fear that people experienced during that time. I mean, I just felt like we were never going to come out of it. And I still feel that we will always be affected by that time period.
Yeah. And, that's the sort of thing that, like, it's a perfectly reasonable feeling, and I share that feeling. But then you put something like that on Twitter, and it's like, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. It's like, no. But even if I were, like, how many of those conspiracy theories have since been proven to be 100% accurate? And it's just, the COVID depression is something I definitely experienced, because like it hit so completely out of left field. And it wasn't just like, everyone being doubly careful that they, cover their mouth when they cough. Like, you're going to stay home for the next 6 months.
Right. Yeah. It was really hard. That's what I was saying. Like, my life was just going along. I had this routine. Everything was seemingly okay. And then suddenly all of that was stopped, like, abruptly.
Yeah.
And everything was from home. For me, I worked from home for 1.5 years. And it was terrible for me. I wanted to go back and say something. And I was actually reflecting on this whenever I was thinking about this podcast we were going to record. Going back to people preserving, intellectually, spiritually.
Yeah.
I know you listen to Andrew Snyder, or you follow.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I do.
Huge fan. And he talks a lot about, he's using Kierkegaard, and he's talking about the ideal self a lot. And I was thinking, okay, so focusing on the ideal self, what does that look like? But also then how does that look? What does the ideal society look like? Like, what is the ideal, what is the ideal vocation for someone? What is the ideal family? What, like, beyond the ideal self, what is the ideal society? What can that look like? And this is something that I've been writing about, just kind of, I've made several notes about how I want to talk about this. And maybe I'll make it into an article and pitch it somewhere. I don't know. And you're gonna be the first person to hear me talk about this, like publicly.
Awesome.
Well, I talked to Dean about this privately, but I don't know how familiar you are with Bowenian theory, Bowen family systems, Murray Bowen.
I remember it from grad school, but we didn't focus too much on it. So tell me
so,
like I know nothing.
Okay, so Bowen has his concept was that everything is functioning in a system. And a system will so a family is a system, and they will orbit in a way, if you will, around the person who is highest in anxiety. And to the degree of that anxiety, a family will be fused or they will be differentiated. So a very fused family is a family that is so sucked in to the vortex of anxiety, and nobody really is autonomous. They're all just orbiting this anxiousness that's in the family. And then a differentiated family is one where every person knows, they're autonomous. They have their own thoughts and feelings. They're still part of the system. They're all still functioning together as a system, but they are autonomous. They are individuals. They have their own wants and needs and preferences and that kind of thing. And they're not serving the anxiety of the family. So he has a differentiation scale that goes 0 to 100. And I think it's in increments of like 10 or 15 or something like that, from 0 to 8. I think there are 8 levels, I think, something like that. So the lowest differentiated person is one who is completely irrational. They cannot separate thought from feeling. They're not autonomous. They are a slave essentially to anxiety, to the anxiety of the system. All of their decision making is based on emotion. All of their responses are based on emotion. Completely not in touch with reality. Obviously, the highest person, you can say that Jesus, if you're a Christian, you can say that Jesus was the most differentiated person to have ever lived on the face of the earth. So a highly differentiated person is going to be someone who can understand, and relate and see what's going on, but also remain autonomous and not get sucked into the anxiety of the situation. So they're a very differentiated person, not a fused person. And so when I think about what the ideal self is, which is what Kierkegaard says, and like Thomas Merton, who says the true self, and Bowen, who is the differentiated self, they're all talking about what is the ideal, what is true, what is the true self, what are we trying to model, what are we trying to attain. And I do think that when that goes out into society, when you have a society that's made up of individuals who are low on the differentiation scale, who are living a very false life, living out of their false self, their pseudo self, you end up with a culture, with a society that is very fused, low differentiation. And I think that's what we're living in now.
That's really interesting.
These are just very loose thoughts that I'm having, that I've written some notes about, that I'm trying to put it all together. So like, how do we move from the ideal self, from the true self, from the differentiated self into a society that reflects the ideal? So if every person in society is living out of the true self, out of the ideal self, and they're highly differentiated, then that's going to make for a differentiated society. So how do we get there, Jeremy?
I guess people could start by listening to Through the Keyhole. So that's a very I should have paid closer attention when we talked about Bowen in grad school, because that's a really interesting theory, and I need to think about that.
That's just where I am. And again, I do not have a fully formed, like, how do I want to articulate this in a way where I'm providing like a foundation for the thinking and where I want to take it. Like, I'm not sure where I want to take that thinking, but I'm like, I can think of multiple, psychologists, philosophers, theologians who are talking about this inner self, this true self, which I say a lot of times is the self we will be in heaven. So the ideal self is the self we will be in heaven, because
Yeah.
it's a perfected, glorified. And can I talk about, I guess I'm just talking freely about Christianity and stuff here.
Please,
feel
I
like
hope I want you to.
right. So the ideal self is the self we will become. Well, we will be in heaven. And we're working toward that. Of course, we're not going to perfect that here on this side of eternity.
Sure.
But how can we work toward that as close as much as possible? And I just think if society, if most of individuals in society were thinking that way, and we're trying to realize that the self-actualization, that it would lead to a much more peaceful, harmonious, flourishing society.
So two things started swirling around in my mind as you were explaining that. One of them goes back to Solzhenitsyn. So the book I referenced, From Under the Rubble, he has an essay in it titled On Repentance and Self-Limitation. And his whole idea in that essay was that in order for a country to heal from its self-inflicted wounds, and in order, I guess, for the world as a whole to kind of move on from whatever wounds that country has inflicted abroad, the country has to repent. And he spends all this time making the point that if an individual can repent, and if repentance really is that first integral step in making right the thing that an individual has done wrong, couldn't, and will that be the step that a country takes as it begins to turn its back on what it was to become what it could be? And he makes a case for the importance of self-limitation. And again, he takes the idea that it's a good thing for a person to impose limits on themselves. It's good to have a healthy appetite, but it's not good to be a glutton. It's okay to have a glass of wine. It's not good to be a drunkard.
So which are biblical concepts.
Exactly. And that's one thing I love about Solzhenitsyn. He was the first intellectual I ever came across who spoke and wrote beautifully about his faith without it being what you typically think of these days when you think of people talking about their faith. Like he spoke in such a way and wrote in such a way as to make it very clear that he believed in something. And as it happens, what he believed in, I don't know if it was Russian Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox or just Orthodox, but he was Orthodox.
Right.
But it, like, you read Solzhenitsyn, and it just, every word he wrote is infused with his faith, but he doesn't he doesn't make a lot of appeals to scripture necessarily. He's not like, and the reason I believe this because of Matthew 3:16,
right?
Nothing like that. But it's just very, it's drenched in a Christian faith. And so he makes this point that, much like with repentance, if it's good for a person to limit themselves, shouldn't that same principle at least be considered for a nation, particularly a nation that is trying to improve, to get better, to heal itself? So that was the first thing that came to mind. The second thing that came to mind was a bit more contemporary. I don't know how familiar you are with Jordan Peterson. Any? None? Yes?
I don't know how old you are, but I was like one of the OG Jordan Peterson followers, like back in like 2010.
Oh, wow.
I was listening to his lectures when he was still in a classroom in Toronto.
Wow.
I was watching video lectures that he did before he ever wrote books. Well, I don't know if he'd written a book at that point, but he was just a professor giving lectures, and they were going viral. And I got in on, it was around 2010. Yeah.
So I'm a huge Jordan Peterson fan, but I didn't allow myself to like really fall into it until probably 3, maybe 4 years ago. Like I remember reading an article about him on First Things when he kind of first rose to prominence with that Canadian bill, Bill C-16, and they were talking
Was that about like the speech?
Yeah, the compelled speech
Yeah.
issue, and they were talking about this Canadian psychologist who had the bravery to say something. And I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. And then of course he became Jordan Peterson. But I bring him up because
a household name
for better. It depends on what household you're in that it's a bad thing. But me and my house, we love Jordan Peterson.
We're gonna get that on sign.
But so the other thing that came to mind was, one of his very foundational ideas is that before you go about trying to change the world or telling the world how it should change, clean your room, right? Like make your bed, make sure that your own house is in order before you start ordering the houses of others. And so, getting back to your point, like it's just such a big project, and it involves such a like you look at it on paper, you're like, yeah, well, I mean, we can probably like write some steps down and they'd make all the sense in the world. The problem is not in finding the solution, it's in figuring out how the solution can be implemented. But yeah, those are my off-the-cuff thoughts on your incredibly interesting idea on Bowen. And how long has that idea been germinating?
Well, I have got my Sunday school class did a whole, like, I don't know, 10 weeks on Bowen family systems.
Wow.
And I like, what can we extract? What can we keep? What can we, dismiss?
Yeah.
And I had just taken in grad school practice with families and groups. So we had just done Bowen theory in my grad school, and then my Sunday school class did Bowen family systems, touched on that for several weeks.
Yeah.
And so just notes and stuff that I made during that time, I was piecing them in with Merton.
Sure.
The false self and the true self. And then I was also thinking about now Andrew's stuff with Kierkegaard and the concept of anxiety and the ideal self. So those three things have just kind of merged together in my mind. And just in working with the kids that I'm working with now, my fifth graders, okay, today we're talking about differentiation. I can't do that. But like, how can I talk to them about achieving the ideal? Like what does the ideal look like to a fifth grader? And so it involves me asking, who's someone you admire? Who's someone you look up to? And what qualities do they have? And if you're going to describe someone, your ideal person, like who you think is a good role model, what characteristics? And so right now, like in small groups, I'm doing character development and things like that.
Nice.
Because a lot of these kids have never had any kind of, just really nothing like that. So we've started from scratch with character development. And so I'm starting with that, and then we're moving toward as much as you can with an ideal self kind of concept and differentiation, but not using that terminology. I see something going on. I feel anger or I feel frustration or whatever about that. And how can I reason through what's going on and still remain, autonomous and not being emotionally involved, that kind of thing. So I just think if every person was being their ideal self, we'd be in heaven, wouldn't we?
We would.
We wouldn't. I'm trying to like be realistic in my thinking, because I'm like, we do live in a broken world. We are marred with sin and the inability to perfect ourselves. I have kind of what you were saying. It's one thing to say, we need to make our bed, we need to clean our room, but then actually doing that. I mean, I've been saying I'm going to organize my office for like 3 months. And I'm not going to show you what's going on over here, because it's a mess.
Sure.
I've had that on my list for like 3 months and I've not actually done it. So it's very easy for us to make plans, but following through with those plans is really hard. I don't really know what my point of saying all that was, but
well, sometimes there's a quote out there. I don't remember who said it, but some famous writer, whoever, said, I don't know what I think until I write it. And I think that there's something good there, and I think that applies as well to speech. And I know that we want to be conscious of your time, and
thank you.
there's so much other stuff that I want to talk to you about, particularly this idea of the ideal self. And so I guess I'll share my final thought, and then we can get your thoughts and then move into the end game. But my thought, just as I've been thinking, is I think that there is a pervasive sense in a lot of people that they are not living up to their potential. And because of this world that we're creating of everybody getting a ribbon, and I can watch anything in the world I want on my phone. If I'm having a bad day, I can distract myself easily. There are just so many options to use or to utilize to run away from when we might be feeling bad or when we encounter something difficult. And there are a few more difficult thoughts that I can think of than looking at yourself in the mirror and honestly assessing whether or not you're doing your best, whether or not you're living up to the thing that you think you could be doing. And it's like, speaking of Kierkegaard, it's kind of an existential idea of just like, why am I here? Why am I here? What am I doing? Is my life going to amount to anything? And is it too late for it to? And all these different questions. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's kind of, I think it really boils down to, what is your worldview? And, we could talk about the ideal self all day long, but like, you and I might have an idea or concept of what the ideal self is, but somebody off the street may be like, well, my worldview is not the same as yours, so my ideal self is not going to be. I was talking to a girl who's in my cohort, and she's going through a lot, and I asked her, like, what is your ideal self? Like, who do you want to be? She's like, I don't know, somebody who like creates stuff, like does art. But that's not really like, I mean, that's a quality of the self, like that's something you can do, but that's not the core of who you are. That's not a principle. So I think the ideal self is when you're able to examine your principles. So, but then like, what is going to drive your principles? Like, if, and for me, like who ties principles and the ideal self, to a religious standard, to something that's external, that's outside of me. That's probably easier, but for someone who is not, they don't have a moral objective or an external source of truth, if they're looking to themselves for the answers to their questions, I'm always like, if the question comes from within, the answer can't also come from within. I'm always like, if the problem is here, the solution can also be here. I just, I struggle with that. So, what was your original question?
I think my original question was just, what are your thoughts on my idea that a lot of people don't pursue their ideal self, basically because they see that they're not there, and the concept of that journey is overwhelming.
It is overwhelming, yes. So for me, I think that if anyone wants to begin that journey, I'm sorry, is your dog, does he need some love?
No, I just cleared my throat.
Okay. I thought your dog was. So I think, just off the top of my head, if someone's trying to realize, to self-actualize the ideal self, they really need to develop a worldview. Like, what are my principles? Why are these my principles? Where do they come from? And how are these principles going to play out? How can I align myself with these principles? What decisions do I need to make about my life? But again, that the ideal supposed worldview.
Mm-hmm.
How are you viewing yourself? What do you understand? What's your anthropology? What is your understanding of man? Your theology? What is your understanding of God? And once you can get those two, I think even Andrew said something like that.
I think
Maybe
so.
I can't remember, but it's been something I've thought about for a long time. You have to have the right view of man, and you have to have the right view of God before you can before you can self-actualize, before you can even develop a worldview.
Yeah.
So don't bother even with the ideal self if your worldview hasn't even been formed, in my opinion. So start there.
I want to have you back on the show another time so that we can dig more into this, because I think that this is a really interesting and prescient, to use a word we've already touched on, a very interesting and prescient idea. And there's obviously a lot to it. But I want to move into the end game, and I try to end things on a bit more light note than we spend our time in the show, because I know that I'm a very dark personality at times, and I don't mind talking about those things, but it's not for everybody. So
I don't mind the darkness. It doesn't bother me at all, because I think people assume that I'm a certain way, and I am energetic and I like bunnies and but I do really understand the dark, and I can be dark, and the people who are closest to me know that I can be. So it doesn't bother me.
Well, then we'll definitely have you back on, and we'll just run into the dark.
I mean, we can talk about all the depressing things. I don't even care.
Well, then that'll be round 2.
Okay, great. Let's do it.
I wanted to, though, because you seem to have a well-known love of bunnies.
Oh, yes.
And I know about this, but I don't understand it. And I don't mean that like, what is wrong with you, but I'm just curious why.
Okay, so we talked about this a little before the show started. I've always been so interested in bunnies, and I really think it's because, so it used to, I'll start with this. It used to be that if you were afraid, you had a fight or flight response. Like if you were in danger, you had a fight or flight response. And then later years, it said that you had a fight, flight, or freeze. Like sometimes you're just frozen.
Right.
And I would say that rabbits have that freeze response. Like they will hunker down. They'll just be still. They'll put their ears down, and they'll just hopefully, you're not going to see me. I'm going to get as low to the ground and not move.
Yeah.
And that's my response to danger, is just to freeze. I become really paralyzed when I'm afraid or in a dangerous situation. I become immobile. I can't move. I can't respond. I can't do anything.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I relate to the spirit of of a rabbit. But also, I just think they're so cute. Just aesthetically, they're just cute.
They are.
And also, we talked about this. I read Watership Down some years ago. And when I was little, I loved Beatrix Potter, Tom Kitten, and Peter Rabbit, and all that stuff. I loved Beatrix Potter. So from an early age, I've just always thought they were just so cute and had little lives, like actual lives of their own. And then when I read Watership Down, which was a much deeper book, that made me think, wow, maybe my rabbits really do have this, and I do believe that all of creation is there to glorify the creator. So I can look at my rabbits and the fact that they're living these little rabbit lives out in my backyard and see the work of my creator. And I see them as just like this gift from the Lord. I mean, I know that sounds funny, but when I see them out in my backyard, I think the Lord gave me this gift of rabbits in my backyard for me to enjoy and for me to just take pleasure in his creation. And as maybe silly as that sounds, that's really what I think. When I see them, I think this is a gift from the Lord for me to enjoy.
I like that view. So I was thinking about rabbits in preparation for our episode today, and something struck me as interesting, and I'd love to know your thoughts on it. Rabbits they're a very hobbit-ish animal. Maybe
because they kind of burrow in the earth.
I actually hadn't even taken that fact into consideration, but yes, that is certainly a thing. But just their complete, like, just leave us alone. We just want to hang around in the tall grass and eat carrots and we're good to go.
Yep.
They're very hobbitish.
Yes. And I talk about being a hobbit all the time.
Right.
I have a height for a hobbit. I'm pretty short in real life. So
how tall are you?
I'd say
Can I ask that?
Yeah, I say I'm 5'2", but I'm really a little bit under 5'2". Like probably like 5'1.5" or 5'1 3/4" or something. So I'm super short.
Yeah.
So I go barefoot all the time. So I've got 2 checks for hobbit.
Yeah. Do you?
And I love Tolkien. I know obviously you love Tolkien.
Of course.
Talking, and we could have a whole episode about that.
Yes.
So yeah, they are kind of a hobbitish creature. They are hobbity in a way.
They just want to be left alone, and when you see them, you just feel a surge of happiness and joy. So my last question for you this episode is: you look around the world, and all of its grungy, dark, war-torn splendor. What gives you hope? What light do you see?
Well, I've said this before, and someone disagreed with me, and I pressed on, and this is, and maybe this will change. Maybe if you ask me this in 5 years, I won't say this, but in Oedipus Rex, the oracle says the truth is its own protector, and I really believe that. Someone said, no, you have to protect the truth. And I said, and I don't believe that. I believe the truth, even if you put it in a corner, even if you try to bury it, the truth exists. It's there, regardless of whether light is being shown on it or whether it's, part of the narrative. And so even when truth seems to be snuffed out, disregarded, whenever the truth is said to be a lie, I do think truth does prevail. I think it does protect itself in the end. And I guess that's what I kind of cling to. And, I've kind of talked about redemption, and obviously people know my, religious leanings. I do believe that that creation has been redeemed, is being redeemed, and will be redeemed. Yeah. And I don't think that that we're living in is the end. I think the truth is its own protector. I think it will out. And even if it's not I said this to someone, like, even if it's not in my lifetime, I have faith that it all will be made right. So I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but that's what I always say.
I think that's an excellent note to end on for this episode. Like I said, I definitely want to have you on again to talk about all the things that we didn't get to, as well as some of the things that we've already touched on. But
we'll talk about the dark things.
We'll talk about the dark things. But thank you for coming on my show.
Thank you, Jeremy. This was a pleasure. This was great. Thank you so much.
This was a lot of fun. The pleasure was all mine. I look forward to having you back on.
Yeah, we'll do it again.
I guess I'll see you on Twitter.
Okay. Adios. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yep.
All right.